Polyunsaturated fats are also in the win category. These contain omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, which are actually essential fatty acids. Our bodies cannot make them, but they require them. So it is important that we eat polyunsaturated fats. They play a critical role in our cell membranes and different signal structuring and different hormone synthesis. So these polyunsaturated fats are not only essential fatty acids that we cannot make, but we do have to eat them because of all of these biological functions that are associated with them. And the foods that are high in the polyunsaturated fats are a lot of the fish that we eat. So things like salmon, tuna, those all have the omega-3 and omega-6 that we need. And just like monounsaturated fats, we know that if we replace foods that are high in saturated fats with foods that are high in polyunsaturated fats, that we have a better cardiac profile, our lipids do better, and we have decreased visceral fat and improved metabolic syndrome. Welcome to No Filter Doctor, where we cut through the health hype, dig into what's real, what works, and what's backed by evidence. I'm your host, Dr. AK. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back. We are going to talk about a very exciting topic today, fat, dietary fat to be specific. And the reason for that is poor fat. It has been the hero and the enemy of all. We're like, fat is really good because it fills you up. And then we're like, no, fat's really, really bad because it's bad for your heart. And then we're like, no, fat's really good. You're doing a low carbohydrate diet. And then it's like, no, fat makes you gain a lot of weight. Poor fat has just been through the wringer because of us. So today I want to get a little bit more into dietary fats. Namely, what do they do? Why is it that we eat them in the first place? From an evolutionary standpoint, what has their role been? And then what are the different kinds of fats that are out there? Because the truth is, there are different fats. They do play different roles and they do have different health implications. And the only way to be able to make good food choices is if you know this information about fats. The bottom line reason why dietary fats are important is because they are deeply involved in multiple biological processes of our body. They help develop different cell walls. They contribute to protein synthesis in different ways. They help develop our clotting factors. They are a structure that's used to make different hormones. So there's really no way to just eliminate fat. Fat is also the most energy dense of all of the macronutrients. 1 gram of fat is about 9 calories. From a survival standpoint, this caloric density of fat was crucial. If you go back to the hunter and gatherer days, we had a lot of food scarcity. Obviously, that's not the case now, but back then it was. So our bodies were designed to crave fat because when we would eat them, we typically had something that we could store. That was extremely beneficial during times of famine. Diets back then consisted of a lot of meats, wild game that were found, and different carbohydrates that would come in the form of fruits and vegetables that hunters and gatherers were able to find. The one thing that I think is really important to keep in mind is that carnivore diet that a lot of the hunters and gatherers were living on, that was all lean game meats. There was no farm where you would go and pick out your really fatty cow that was grass-fed or massaged, had great marbling in the meat, and then you would base your diet off of that. This was all wild game, and wild game is notoriously lean. So even in those animal sources of protein, fat was hard to come by. So the body, when it saw it, was like, yes, and it wanted to gobble it. And since then, our bodies have been wired to crave fat. But here's the thing to consider. Human biology did not change. The food environment did. Human biology takes thousands of years to undergo evolution. The food environment, now you can just go to the grocery store near you to get it. We're not doing any more hunting and gathering. So that caloric expenditure is nowhere close to what it used to be, but the caloric intake and the fat intake is way higher than it used to be. And that's why we struggle so much with fat now in the modern day. We basically moved from these diets that were based on lean proteins while we were getting all kinds of steps in trying to hunt the animals, to now having diets that the proteins are really not that lean at all because of agriculture and how the animals were raised, and our caloric expenditure went way down. We are now driving. Well, our bodies have not evolved to accommodate for that huge shift. Here's the interesting thing about the hunter-gatherer diet. It hasn't completely disappeared. There are pockets of individuals who are very isolated from the industrialized world, which now allows us to look at the metabolics of this hunter-gatherer diet and then chronic disease. One such population are the Hadzas of northern Tanzania. This population consumes a high fiber, protein adequate, and seasonally variable diet. They also participate in over 100 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity every day. So, as you may expect, they have very low BMI, very low visceral fat, and very low chronic metabolic disease. Another group are the Tsimane people of Bolivia. They live a traditional forager and horticulture lifestyle and also happen to have the lowest amount of cardiovascular disease out of any one of these populations that have been studied. Their diet is predominantly carbohydrate based, but those carbohydrates are super high in fiber. There's almost no saturated fat, no added sugars. They also participate in several hours of physical activity every day. The Yanomami people of the Amazon rainforest live a semi-nomadic lifestyle that is focused on hunting and gathering and very small-scale agriculture. They also have a very low incidence of cardiovascular disease. The reason I bring this up is because there are a lot of people out there who are like, the carnivore diet, we need to eat the carnivore diet, it's protein and fat. You also have people who talk about the paleo diet and they're like, yeah, no carbs, we want to limit carbs. That's not what those traditional diets were like, and the reason we know that is because we have these isolated pockets of people that we can study now. Yes, there's hunting and gathering, but there is some agriculture that's going on. It's not mass corporate agriculture that most of us are used to when we go to the grocery store. But the one thing that's in common among all of them, whether it's a mainly carbohydrate or mainly animal protein diet, is they do a ton of physical activity every single day. There is no sitting down on the couch watching TV and eating a bag of potato chips in any of these communities, which leads me to the fact that all fats are not created equal. The fats that are in that bag of potato chips are a lot different than the fats that are in the venison of the deer that someone hunted versus the fats that are in that big fat dry-aged ribeye that you went to the butcher store and purchased. And so I think it's important that we talk about these different fats and how our bodies are affected by the consumption of them. The very first thing that we need to talk about when we're talking about fats is the fact that some of them are saturated and some of them are unsaturated. When we are talking about saturated versus unsaturated fats, we are talking about the presence and configuration of carbon-carbon double bonds. Saturated fats have no carbon-carbon double bonds. So structurally, they're a lot straighter. It allows them to be stored a lot easier, and they can be stored really compactfully because they are linear. They just kind of layer on top of one another. And it's the saturated fats that we know that are linked to atherosclerotic disease and increases our LDL cholesterol. And this is not up for debate. There's a lot of people who want to argue about saturated fats. There is nothing to argue here. There are so many studies that show the negative health consequences of saturated fats and show that when you eliminate saturated fats and replace them with unsaturated fats, everything gets better. Inflammation goes down, LDL gets better. You can actually have some reversal of some of the plaques that are formed. So there really is no question about saturated fats. They're predominantly found in animal-based proteins, but you can also find them in some plant-based proteins. So avocados have saturated fat in them, as do coconuts. So coconut oil, palm oil, those are cooking oils that are high in saturated fats. A tricky fat are trans fats, and I'm going to tell you why they're tricky. Technically, they are an unsaturated fat. So you would think, oh, it's unsaturated, it's good. That's not true. So the reason they're tricky is when we have carbon-carbon double bonds in fats, what typically happens is one hydrogen atom is pointing up and the other one is pointing down. In trans fats, those hydrogen ions are pointing in the same direction. So they're either both up or they're both down, which then makes that fat molecule linear. So then it ends up behaving like saturated fats. But because it has this carbon-carbon double bond, it's actually worse than saturated fats. Trans fats were originally discovered in the creation of margarine. Food industries wanted to have some kind of room temperature stable oil, kind of like butter, but they were like, we want it to be plant-based because that's healthier. So then they invented margarine. And then all these studies were done and people were keeling over because of heart issues because of margarine. And then everyone started freaking out that plant-based oils are really bad. And then they figured out, no, it's actually not the plant-based oils, it's the trans fats. Believe it or not, trans fats are against the law to have in foods, but they still exist in some quantities that are not measurable. So they are in a lot of different processed foods. Industrialized foods, they're the ones that have trans fats. And if you read the nutrition label, oftentimes it'll say 0 trans fats, but it's not exactly 0. It's just so low that they can't put a value on it. So trans fats are a sneaky unsaturated fat that are completely unhealthy, that should be avoided at all costs. There's nothing good about a trans fat. In fact, if you have to choose the lesser of two evils, I would pick saturated over trans fats because of the health consequences of trans fats. That leaves us with the monounsaturated and the polyunsaturated fat. So a monounsaturated fat has one carbon-carbon double bond and the hydrogen ions are going in opposite direction. That makes the fat molecule have bends and kinks in it. So it's not quite as linear. They are found in olive oil, which we know has pretty good health benefits. In fact, monounsaturated fats are associated with an improved lipid profile and improved insulin resistance whenever they are replaced for saturated fats or any refined carbohydrates. So monosaturated fats are a thumbs up. They get a big win. Polyunsaturated fats are also in the win category. These contain omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, which are actually essential fatty acids. Our bodies cannot make them, but they require them. So it is important that we eat polyunsaturated fats. They play a critical role in our cell membranes, in different signal structuring, in different hormone synthesis. And the foods that are high in the polyunsaturated fats are a lot of the fish that we eat. So things like salmon, tuna, those all have the omega-3 and omega-6 that we need. And just like monounsaturated fats, we know that if we replace foods that are high in saturated fats with foods that are high in polyunsaturated fats, that we have a better cardiac profile, our lipids do better, and we have decreased visceral fat and improved metabolic syndrome. So there you have the difference between all of the fats. And these are not opinions. This is actual fact on what the different types of fats are and what they do when we eat them and they enter our bodies. What's the big picture then? How are we putting this all together? It's nuanced, just like almost everything else that we talk about, right? Like I will come right out and say, do not eat trans fats. They are bad. We should not eat them. When we talk about saturated versus monounsaturated versus polyunsaturated, I mean, we need all of these fats, but we should limit our saturated fats to less than 10% of our total daily calories. Me, I have an insanely high Lp(a), so I actually reduce my saturated fats to less than 6% of my total daily calories. But it's not just all about fat consumption. So the people who are pushing these carnivore diets or pushing different diets that are really, really high in fat, we do not want them to be high in saturated fats. Your monounsaturated fats and your polyunsaturated fats are way healthier. But even then, every 1 gram is 9 calories. So you have to balance this fat intake with caloric output. You need to exercise. It needs to be at least moderate intensity exercise so that we do not store all of this excess fat. When your body has too much of anything, it's going to store it. The only thing that we do a really terrible job of storing is protein. Glucose and fat is going to get stored in our bodies. So I hope that clears up a little bit more about fats and some of these fat diets and what different fats do and the whole saturated versus unsaturated fat. And I would love to hear from you if you have any other questions about this, because it was a question that sparked this entire podcast today. I'll see you next week. Take care. Thank you so much for joining me on this week's No Filter Doctor. If you enjoyed the content, you can follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. You can also go to www.thewholehumanhealthandwellbeing.com and sign up for the weekly newsletter, where you will get a link to the blog, that week's podcast, and a health tip of the week sent directly to you. It's important to know that while I am a doctor, I'm not your doctor. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only, and it's not intended as medical advice. Listening to this podcast does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. The information discussed should not be used to diagnose, treat, or prevent any medical condition, nor should it replace individualized medical care. If you have questions or concerns about your health, please contact your own healthcare provider. Any decisions to delay or forego a medical evaluation or treatment based on the information discussed in this podcast are made so at your own risk. My only financial disclosure is my medical practice, The Whole Human Health and Wellbeing. Take care, and I'll talk to you next week.